This story follows a man who gets transported into a game he was playing and reincarnated into a god named Nebula. However, he's not alone in this divine realm, as there were 27 other gods, and they have to fight to become the sole ruler of the planet and reshape it according to their vision. Part of their challenge is to find and influence a suitable tribe, and luckily for Nebula, a lizardman named RECAPS was insightful enough to realize what his intentions were. And so, after preparing what they necessarily needed, they followed their god's will and leave the sanctuary to find a larger and more resource-rich area. However, their journey is fraught with difficulties, and they soon encounter a new obstacle: a group of scaleless adversaries blocking their path. Now on to the next part. The scaleless bastards they were talking about is a group of steamy orcs, and is now excitedly rushing towards the lizard man that they saw, as they plan to take their resources and get out of this horrible place as quickly as possible. And they were confident in defeating those lizards, as they believe that their species is more powerful in terms of strength. But to their surprise, these lizards aren't your average day-to-day lizards, and they even have the whole crew with them. With this, they instantly knew they messed up, and so they just froze in fear. And observing their reaction, RECAPS couldn't help but teasingly mock their foolishness, likening them to moths blindly drawn to a flame, unaware of the danger they were courting. However, they were too stunned to even respond, and looking at their units, it seemed like these lizards are more well-equipped than they were. With this, the orc leader immediately lowered his weapon and bowed his head, and asked RECAPS for forgiveness, and explained that they did not mean to make such a big fuss. They were just in a hurry as they wanted to get out of the canyon as quickly as possible. This confused RECAPS because, as he had observed the hillside, there didn't seem to be a problem, and according to Stargazer, the canyon they were in now would take 3 days for them to traverse. But as they had endured everything until now, they would surely be able to endure another 3 days. In addition, as the environment changed, edible things began to appear here and there, so he couldn't understand why they want to leave that hill as quickly as possible. In turn, he asked the orcs to explain further, which the orc lord didn't hesitate to do just that, explaining to them that they wouldn't even think of leaving their home, but they were left with no choice, and so they ran away, and it was because a monster had appeared. This surprised RECAPS' group, and if the group of orcs were guilty of something, they would have to make up for it. But RECAPS thought that was unnecessary, and following the rules of the wilderness, Jael recommended taking away what the orcs had, but RECAPS didn't do so. Instead, just as Jael gave RECAPS food, and RECAPS gave Manun food, he gave some food to the orcs as well, which the orc leader hadn't expected to be welcomed, and so he bowed down so far that his head touched the ground, while RECAPS left the orc to do as he pleased. But he emphasized that it wasn't given for nothing, so he asked the orc to tell him more about the monster, which he gladly will, and tell him in exact details. The group of orcs had lived close by. They weren't able to go deeper into the mountains, as there were stronger species, and especially carnivores there. However, compared to the wilderness, it was easy to find food in this area, so it wasn't much of a problem for a group of 30 orcs. But one day, the monster appeared. The monster apparently had a hard upper body, and seemed to crawl on the ground like an insect with many legs, and it was over 20 meters long. Meanwhile, Nebula recognized exactly what it was once he heard the description. It's no doubt an abomination. The plot of the game, The Lost World, was that old gods had left the planet. However, the gods were the only ones who had disappeared, and the numerous species and creatures that served the gods remained. Among them was the abomination. Simply put, it was like a giant boss monster that appeared on the field, and whoever took the risk and hunted it would get a corresponding award. The problem is that it's tricky to deal with for a low-level civilization, and the reason why he was sure of it was simple. The abomination was a creation of the gods. Therefore, divinity modifiers existed for its skills. This meant that its skills are going to be incredible. It won't be that high, because it's out in the field, as opposed to inside a dungeon. But considering its basic skills and special abilities, it will be stronger than RECAPS with plus D3. And if they had an equal fight, RECAPS would likely be injured, and even if he didn't, the rest of the warriors would suffer injuries. With this, Nebula was considering if he should give them a hint to take a detour. However, it wasn't quite a good idea to do that either, because RECAPS' clan and the herd of buffaloes were all losing energy. But to Nebula's surprise, RECAPS proved himself again why he was chosen by him, as if RECAPS had a similar thought to him. RECAPS called out Stargazer and asked him if there is a way they can go around, to which Stargazer responded that there are, but they would have to go back to the wilderness and walk around the mountain for 8 days. Instantly, RECAPS shook his head as if he didn't like what he heard. So it seems like they can't run away without even seeing what their opponent is like. But as they had feared, it was undoubtedly strong. It was about 15 meters long, which was smaller than what the orc had described, but it was in no way small. The body was elongated and covered by a hard outer shell. It even had a pair of venomous fangs. Hanging from the top of the outer skin was a half-destroyed stone structure which signified that the ancient people had served this creature. The moss that covered the structure gave away how old the creature was. And its divinity level was at 3. And since its basic strength was 120, it would still be stronger than RECAPS, even if divine control was used. And even though RECAPS' group couldn't see the creature's stats, they seemed intimidated by the ancient Coleoptera as it twisted its body under the valley. And it didn't help that its mere movements shake the ground. And it even revealed to them by the Orc Lord that turbulence was caused by the creature just moving in its sleep. With this, you ask RECAPS if they should ran away. However, RECAPS knows all too well that it would be costly. With this, RECAPS was not sure on what to do next. But as they were waiting for RECAPS to decide, Joel was inspecting her surroundings and noticed the huge boulder just sitting on the edge of the hill. And so she immediately approached RECAPS and told him that they must fight because they have the advantage. This led Nebula to take interest in Joel's opinion, and so he briefly took a look at her stats. Revealing to him that she has the Arbiter class, this meant that one is trusted by the clan, which he already knew. But her intelligence level is higher than RECAPS, and it keeps on rising. But the most interesting thing is her special ability, intuition. It was a special ability that hadn't popped up until recently. It was perhaps newly created due to recent experiences. With this, Nebula waited for Joel's next words. To his surprise, Joel talked about what the iron craftsmen did to heat the iron. Until now, they have been blowing air with their mouths, waving their hands, or ripping large pieces of bark and fanning them. However, the iron craftsman seems to use a different method, a special tool called bellows. It was able to blow much more wind and was more convenient. And with just this, RECAPS get what Joel's trying to convey, and that by using tools, less power can be used to project more power. But the problem was, they do not have a tool like bellows. Also, that tool was made by the craftsman, after he thought about it for a long time. In response, Joel clarified that they won't need such a sophisticated tool. A simple tool will be more than enough, as the monster they need to deal with is sleeping at the bottom of that hillside, and they are at a much higher elevation. They are no different than a craftsman sitting in front of a forge. So if they just prepare and act accordingly, they will be able to heat the metal. These words alone didn't make sense to RECAPS or the rest of the warriors, but Joel proceeded to tell them a specific idea she had in mind. RECAPS and the warriors nodded and took it well. That was also true for Nebula, so he used a miracle to summon a blue butterfly in front of RECAPS, which the warriors wondered what was happening as a blue butterfly appeared out of season in the wilderness, while RECAPS stared blankly at the butterfly's wings, and his eyes began to shine, and then raised the corners of his mouth, as this was a sign that God has given permission. With this, he decided to go what Joel had just said, and so they immediately went to the steep and rugged hillside. At the bottom of the hillside, where the ancient Coleoptera was twisting and sleeping, there was a steep slope of about 70-degree angle. This meant that were RECAPS and his warriors to fight the ancient Coleoptera there, they wouldn't be able to easily move around due to the steep slope, and would likely come into direct contact with the ancient Coleoptera. On the other hand, the giant ancient Coleoptera had many legs, so it would be able to climb an even steeper slope. Still, it won't matter, because RECAPS will be the only one to get close to it, because according to the plan, the only time RECAPS was going to approach the ancient Coleoptera was when they were going to kill it. And with just a few moments of preparation, the warriors were now stationed beside the boulders that RECAPS had pointed to. They weren't barehanded. They found and uprooted a few tall trees in the area, and were each holding one in its entirety, to roll the boulders and crushing it to death. It was indeed a simple plan, but a plan that required imagination. Even RECAPS thought confronting and fighting it face to face was the only way. But Joel, on the other hand, thought differently. Joel didn't know exactly how to express it, but she was using her knowledge to prove with real actions that moving large things with little strength was possible. And in Nebula's eyes, her knowledge could be referred to as physics to systematize it, as she's basically applying the principles of mass and kinetic energy alongside positional energy and leverage. But that didn't mean Joel would suddenly become a physicist. However, just as the iron craftsman's skills influenced Joel's intuition, one event could influence many individuals, which is a good thing for Nebula. So he eagerly looked at their every move, and since everything was ready, the warriors immediately went into action. However, the boulders didn't move right away, and so Joel signaled to a beat, which was effective, as the boulders gradually started to shake more and more, and it was not long until a boulder rolled over the ridge. But to catch a crustacean of that level, it would be better if all the rocks hit it at the same time. However, it wasn't the case, as they only managed to toss one, and that wasn't enough. It just enraged the creature, and therefore it immediately crawled up the hill to attack them. and even with its large body. This mofo was fast, and with this, Nebula knew that it was too late, and so he took over Rakrak's body with divine control. Instantly, Rakrak successfully pushed the second boulder that was about to roll over the ridge with great force. Then he proceeded to push the third boulder hard, which wasn't moving easily due to it being the largest one out of the three. Still, with Nebula inside of him, he had managed to push it to the edge. But still, Rakrak knew that the creature would not just run towards the boulder head-on, so he clasped his spear and jumped from the mountain ridge, flying 300 meters across the air, and threw the spear with all his might. With this, the spear shot through the air like a ray of light and penetrated through the ancient Coleoptera's shell. And even though it was a small wound, it was enough to restrain its movement for a moment. With this, the ancient Coleoptera received the boulder like it was on a promo, a buy-one-take-one at that. And because the boulder directly landed on the ancient Coleoptera's head, it died in an instant. After seeing the death of the giant monster, the group roared for Rakrak, the warriors, and for the great beetle god. Meanwhile, Nebula was delighted of the outcome. But it wasn't the increased faith points that mattered. His divinity level hadn't changed as leveling up had gotten slower, and there wasn't much XP. What really mattered was the item he gained from it, the essence of abomination. When it came to being a god, their greatest power was the ability to create something. Just as Nebula was able to create enough maggots to feed the lizard man due to his small area, the insects. Each god was able to create resources according to their areas by using faith points. However, to create something that doesn't exist in the world, resources that were equally uncommon had to be used, and that would be the essence of abomination. And with this essence, it would be possible to create a creature. These creatures are faith resources generators that spread the word of God through their very existence. Also, growth is possible, and if one raises it to a higher level, it would obtain the title apostles or incarnations, and could be employed as useful strategic weapons in place of God's will. And if the creation method itself is the same as the previous game, then he would easily be able to make a creature, which in turn made him wonder what to make. However, he decided to not make one right away as it costs a lot to maintain in the beginning. And it is better to create a creature at another time even if all the necessary resources had been collected. For now, it was a priority to use faith points to help Rakrak and the group, but at least Nebula had learned that the Creature Maker program that was in the game The Lost World was also available to him now. So he left the program window open within his view. Meanwhile, Jael approached the defeated monster, curious if they could use the meat of this monster as food. She cut off the tip of the ancient Coleoptera's foot. However, the aroma of it wasn't pleasant. Still, it wasn't particularly a sign not to eat it, so she puts it into her mouth before promptly spitting it out. But she admits that the taste isn't that bad, and it's edible as well. However, it is still difficult to eat it raw. This led her to wonder if it was possible to add other ingredients, just like an edible fragrant grass, and cook it over a fire. And with a few moments later, she had cooked up a meal made from the legs of the monster, in which Rakrak consumed with caution, but as the meat touched his taste buds, he was surprised that it was edible. Although a bit bland, the aroma of it was quite nice, and seeing his reaction, Jael proudly called it cooking. She topped the meat with edible scented herbs and cooked it over fire, which Rakrak appreciated that she thought of a solution this quick, because he had been considering to throw the monster's carcass all away since the smell was so strong. But with her cooking, it seems like their list of edible food broadened, and so he prompted asking if she could also teach him how to cook, which she responded that she could. However, before that, she wants to address a concern that occupied her mind for a while, and that she saw the orc leader earlier also had a successor. And because Rakrak is a leader as well, he too needs to find a companion soon. This sudden suggestion of hers immediately froze him up, and the meat that he was eating got stuck in his throat, but he was able to swallow it due to the uniquely wide throats lizardmen were born with. Still, he was thrown off by Jael's words as he had never cared much about finding a companion for the past few years. He was preoccupied with his concerns about God, the tribe, and surviving in general. But before he could even think of a response, Jael pointed out that he is getting old, so it is necessary for stability of the tribe. And seeing that she was serious about this, he man up and composed himself, and asked Jael if what she meant was a partner, to which she confirmed, and if he had never really think about it, then how about he consider her. But because of how sudden this all was, he wasn't sure how he should reply. Fortunately enough, something else happened that he needed to attend to. There lay the altar broken by the boulder, and inside of it, something was shining, reflecting light from the sunset. Among the fragments of the altar was a tablet made of gold. This was a surprise to Nebula, but the golden tablet that Rakrak found was a very common relic. If one was lucky enough to chance upon an ancient ruin, they could find a library of calligraphic works that was full of written language from that era. The ancient people wrote about every little thing, so it would be considered great luck if the writings they found weren't simply about building houses or other trivial matters. However, this is a decent find. RECAPS and the group didn't know what it said on the golden tablet, as they didn't know what the characters meant. But to the player, all information was revealed. The inscription on the golden tablet is an introduction to the ancient civilization that was once called the Kalanbar Empire. It largely consists of writings about the greatness of the Kalanbar Empire and its achievements, so there isn't much important information to be gleaned. Nevertheless, aside from its value as a source of information about an ancient civilization, it gives a hint about other ancient remains of the Kalanbar Empire. But civilization needs to be a lot more advanced to translate it. And because the Lost World was full of ancient civilizations, it wouldn't be necessary to reach the level of development of modern civilization on Earth, where a framework to interpret Egyptian hieroglyphics could be established based on the famous Rosetta Stone. Nevertheless, a diverse society with archaeologists, linguists, universities, and sufficient knowledge of a variety of civilizations was needed. So right now, the tablet is no different from trash. But because the golden tablet itself was a piece of very shiny metal, it attracted the attention of the lizardmen. Yor even picked it up and tried to eat it, but to his dismay, Stargazer revealed to him that he couldn't do that, since it is a metal called gold, and it is said that the color does not change or rot even after a long time. That is why they are a little more valuable. However, gold was a soft metal and would serve them no better than iron right now. It would be worth having the precious metal as decoration, but that type of art was unfamiliar to the lizard man compared to other species. With that explained, Yor was still hungry, so Stargazer suggested to catch a deer. Its meat is sweet and delicious, and they have heard that the orcs had found deer track earlier, so they should go now before the night comes. And so the others decided to leave and throw the tablet and just set it aside. However, RECAPS did not intend to throw it away. It seemed that RECAPS actually liked the golden tablet, and so he told the others to go without him, while he thinks about what to do with this tablet. And he was so engrossed with it because everything dies, rots and disappear. There is nothing in the world that does not change. But this golden tablet does not rot. So RECAPS got a feeling that those who made this tablet tried to preserve something on it, but he doesn't have a single clue where to start, and so he just stared at it for a little while. A few moments later, Jael reappeared to tell him that everyone is ready for bed, but RECAPS saw this as an opportune moment to seek Jael's opinion, and so he told her about what he thinks of this tablet. And seeing that she fully understood where he was getting at, RECAPS pointed out that he also noticed there are rules to the engravings, as there were shapes that are the same. This in turn made Jael point out that it is similar to the hunting marks their warriors make. And just like how he is the only lizardman wearing a fur coat, which she specifically told him to wear. And that is because she wanted him to have a distinctive item that set him apart, a symbol as the tribal leader. With this, his understanding broadens, but still it was too early for him to realize what these symbols meant. And so few hours had passed, and he was still in front of the sacrificed deer, and is still looking intently at the tablet. Meanwhile, Nebula saw a slight possibility. With his support, RECAPS might be able to invent primitive letters, especially when RECAPS' willpower was high, so he was likely to continue paying attention to something that he was interested in, and so he gave it a try. But a god giving direct knowledge to their tribe would consume a great amount of faith points, but giving hints was no different from a normal miracle. And with this, RECAPS saw something strange. It seemed that the bugs were moving according to certain patterns, as if there was an invisible hand guiding them. These hallucinations appeared and disappeared several times before RECAPS' eyes. He thought the wriggling motion seemed familiar, and his realization wasn't far off. He was thinking that the movement of these bugs is similar to the engravings that the ancient people made on the golden tablet. With this, RECAPS thought of a few things and drew on the ground with a stick. At first, he copied the characters on the golden tablet. Then, he doodled things that weren't letters or symbols, and soon after, he erased the lines that he had left on the ground with his hands, lost in his thoughts. Now he was considering that it might not be the gold that won't rot with this golden tablet, but might be something else. And with this, he had spent the night writing on the ground with the stick, and when morning arrived, RECAPS went to Jael's tent and woke her up, which she initially thought that there might be something wrong, but RECAPS clarified that he has something to show her, and RECAPS seemed somewhat excited, so she decided to follow him. And as they went over to a clear ground, RECAPS started writing. He first drew a triangle and two perpendicular lines with the stick, and explained to Jael that this was him, a male lizard. This intrigued Jael, so she asked to explain further. So then RECAPS drew an inverted triangle and two lines, and explained that this was her, to be precise, a female lizard. And seeing that Jael understood what he meant, RECAPS then proceeded to draw two lines between the two drawings. Rakrak fell silent after drawing these 2 lines, so Jaol had no choice but to ask first. In response, with a more sincere tone, Rakrak explained that this symbol meant becoming each other's companion, and this is also his answer to what she asked. With this, they looked at each other's eyes intently, but Jaol felt that something is missing in those symbols that Rakrak wrote. So she took the stick from Rakrak and drew a circle. And Jaol asked Rakrak if he get what this means, and with certainty, he answered that he does. And with that, the 2 lizards fell in silence under the soft light of the early sun, as they were in the moment of clarity, comfort, and a feeling of being exactly where they were meant to be.